Homeless after prison, an elderly woman returned to a junk gas station that everyone in town said was worthless. She'd spent 30 years behind bars for a crime she didn't commit, and when she finally came home, all that was left was a rotting building, rusted pumps, and a phone that hadn't been connected in decades. The Greyhound bus pulled into Dalton County at 6:47 in the morning, right when the sun was just starting to turn the sky from gray to pink. Vera Mitchell was the only passenger who got off. She stood on the cracked sidewalk with everything she owned in a plastic bag from the state correctional facility. One change of clothes, a comb, $43 in cash, and a single key on a piece of twine, worn smooth from 30 years of being held, turned over, and held again. The bus driver gave her a long look before closing the doors. She'd seen that look plenty of times in the past 3 decades. The look people give you when they're trying to figure out what you did. The look that says they've already decided. Vera was 64 years old. Her hair had gone completely white in prison, though it had been dark as coffee when she went in. Her hands, once soft from the lotions she used to keep on the counter of her family's store, were now rough and cracked from years of industrial laundry work. But her eyes were the same, gray-green, like the pond behind her grandmother's house, clear and steady and patient. She'd learned patience in prison. She'd had no choice. The town of Millbrook hadn't changed much in 30 years, and that was both a comfort and a cruelty. The hardware store still sat on the corner of Main and Oak, though the sign had faded and the owner had surely changed. The diner across the street still had the same red awning, a little more torn now, a little more tired. The church steeple still rose above the tree line at the end of the street, and somewhere behind it, the morning bells began to ring. Vera started walking. She knew exactly where she was going. She'd dreamed about it every night for 30 years. Sometimes the dream was sweet. She'd walk through the door, and everything would be just as she'd left it. The wooden counter polished to a shine. The candy jars lined up in a row. Her father's voice calling from the back room. Her mother humming while she restocked the shelves. But most nights, the dream was different. Most nights, she'd arrive to find the place burned to the ground, or bulldozed, or simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all, as if she had imagined her whole life before the trial. It took her 22 minutes to walk from the bus station to the edge of town where County Road 7 split off toward the lake. Her feet remembered the way even when her mind wandered. Past the old elementary school, past the cemetery where her parents were buried side by side, past the Hendricks farm, where the apple trees had grown tall and wild without anyone to tend them. And then, finally, there it was, Mitchell's country store and gas station. Vera stopped walking. Her throat tightened and her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. She'd stopped crying somewhere around year 8. What was the point? Tears didn't change anything. They didn't bring back the dead, or free the innocent, or make the truth any less bitter. The gas station looked exactly like her worst dreams. The 2 pumps out front had rusted into sculptures of decay, their hoses cracked and hanging like dead snakes. The windows were so thick with grime that she couldn't see through them. The wooden sign her father had carved by hand, the one that said Mitchell's, in letters he'd burned into the oak with a soldering iron, hung at an angle, one chain broken, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Weeds had pushed up through every crack in the pavement. The concrete pad where customers used to park was now more vegetation than surface, with dandelions and ragweed claiming territory that had once been swept clean every morning before sunrise. The roof sagged in the middle. The paint, once a cheerful red that her mother had chosen because she said it looked like a cardinal, had faded to a brownish rust, peeling away in long strips that curled like old skin. It looked like a corpse, like something that had died a long time ago and been left to rot where it fell. Vera walked toward it anyway. The key still fit. She'd been afraid of this moment. 30 years was a long time. Locks rusted, wood swelled, things changed. But when she slid the key into the deadbolt on the front door, the same deadbolt her father had installed in 1962, it turned with a soft click as if it had been waiting for her. The door stuck. swollen from years of rain and neglect. Vera put her shoulder into it, feeling the ache in her bones, and pushed. It gave with a groan that seemed to come from the building itself, releasing a breath of stale air that smelled like dust and mildew and something else. Something older. Something that might have been the ghost of motor oil and penny candy and fresh coffee. She stepped inside. The morning light struggled through the filthy windows, casting everything in a dim gray wash. Vera stood in the doorway and let her eyes adjust, let the memories crash over her like a wave she'd been holding back for decades. The counter was still there, covered in dust so thick it looked like gray felt, but still there. The old cash register, a heavy brass thing that had belonged to her grandfather, sat exactly where she'd left it on the morning the police came. She could see the shapes of the candy jars underneath their coating of grime, still lined up in a row. The cooler in the back had died long ago, its glass doors fogged and dark. The shelves that had once held bread and canned goods and household supplies were empty now, just bare wooden planks covered in cobwebs. Something had made a nest in the far corner. She could see the pile of shredded paper and fabric, but whatever it was had long since moved on. And there, on the wall behind the counter, exactly where it had always been, was the phone. It was an old rotary phone, avocado green, mounted to the wall with a curled cord that hung down like a question mark. Her mother had ordered it from the Sears catalog in 1971 because she'd seen one just like it in a magazine and thought it looked modern. Vera walked toward it slowly, her footsteps leaving prints in the thick dust on the floor. She reached out and touched the receiver, leaving a clean streak on the plastic. The phone line had been disconnected 30 years ago, along with the electricity and the water and everything else. She knew that. She wasn't crazy, despite what some people might think about a woman who spent 3 decades in prison. But she also knew something else, something she'd never told anyone, something that had kept her going through every endless night in her cell, every humiliation, every moment of despair. She knew the phone would ring again. Well, I'll be damned. The voice came from behind her. Vera turned slowly, her heart pounding, one hand instinctively going to her chest. A man stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the morning light. He was old, maybe even older than her, with a feed cap pushed back on his head and overalls that had seen better decades. His face was weathered and lined, but his eyes were sharp and curious. "Vernon?" Vera said, barely believing it. "Vera Mitchell." He shook his head slowly, stepping into the store. "Heard you were getting out. Didn't believe it until just now." Vernon Dockery. He'd been her father's best friend, back when her father was alive. He'd taught Vera how to change a tire when she was 12, how to check the oil, how to pump gas without spilling. He'd been at her trial, too. One of the few people who'd shown up to support her, though it hadn't done any good. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Vernon said. "Maybe I have." Vera glanced around the ruined store. "Maybe I'm the ghost." Vernon came closer, his boots crunching on the debris that had accumulated on the floor over the years. Broken glass, dead leaves, things she didn't want to identify. He stopped a few feet away from her and studied her face. "You got old," he said finally. "So did you. Fair enough." He almost smiled. "You planning to stay?" Vera looked at the counter, at the register, at the phone on the wall. "This is my place," she said quietly. "My father built it. His father owned the land before him. 4 generations of Mitchells." "Vera." Vernon's voice was gentle, the way you'd talk to someone who needed to hear something hard. "This place has been abandoned for 30 years. County's been trying to condemn it. The bank's been circling. And the Dawsons. I know about the Dawsons." The name landed between them like a stone dropped in still water. Vernon's expression shifted, and Vera saw something there. Guilt, maybe, or shame, or just the weariness of a man who'd watched bad things happen and been unable to stop them. "Earl Dawson died," Vernon said. 6 years ago. Heart attack. I know that too. His boy runs things now. Martin. He's not like his father. But he's still a Dawson." Vernon nodded slowly. "He's still a Dawson." Vera turned back to face the window, looking out at the overgrown lot, the rusted pumps, the road that had once been busy with travelers stopping for gas and supplies and conversation. She remembered summer afternoons when the air smelled like hot asphalt and the radio played nothing but country music, and her mother would make sweet tea so cold it made your teeth ache. She remembered the last morning, too. The morning the police cruiser pulled into the lot with its lights flashing. The morning they'd handcuffed her in front of her own store while the morning regulars watched in silence. The morning Earl Dawson had stood across the street with his arms crossed, watching her be loaded into the back of the car, and she'd seen the smile he was trying to hide. "I didn't do it, Vernon," she said, not turning around. "I've said it 1,000 times and I'll say it until I die. I did not steal that money. I know you didn't." She turned then, surprised. In 30 years, Vernon had never said that to her. He'd supported her, yes. He'd shown up at the trial and he'd written her letters in prison. Not many, but some. And he'd never treated her like a criminal, but he'd never said he believed her. "You believe me?" Vernon took off his cap and ran a hand through his thin white hair. "I've had 30 years to think about it, Vera. 30 years to watch the Dawsons get rich while this place rotted. 30 years to remember how convenient it all was. The timing, the evidence, the way Earl had been trying to buy this land from your daddy for years before he died." He put his cap back on and met her eyes. "Your daddy wouldn't sell, and then he died, and then you got sent away, and then, surprise, surprise, the bank suddenly owned the property, and Earl Dawson's cousin just happened to work at the bank, and the whole thing just sat here. Nobody bought it. Nobody developed it. Nobody touched it. For 30 years. Vera felt something loosen in her chest. Something she'd been holding so tight for so long that she'd forgotten it was there. "Why?" she asked. "Why did they want it so bad?" Vernon was quiet for a long moment. Then he walked over to the window and looked out at the same view Vera had been studying. "Your daddy ever tell you about the old well?" Vera frowned. "The well? The one out back? It went dry in the 50s. Grandpa capped it off." "Did he?" It wasn't a question. Vernon turned back to her. "Vera, there's things about this land that most folks don't know. Things your daddy kept close. He was planning to tell you, I think, that last year, before he got sick, he kept saying he needed to talk to you about the future of this place, about what it was really worth." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Earl Dawson knew something, and I'm saying that whatever he knew, it was worth sending an innocent woman to prison for 30 years to get his hands on." Vera's mind was spinning. She thought of her father, thin and tired in his hospital bed, trying to tell her something in those last confused days. She'd thought it was just the illness talking, the way he kept mentioning the phone, the store, the land. "When the phone rings," he'd whispered once, gripping her hand with surprising strength. "When it rings, you answer. Promise me." She'd promised, not understanding. A week later, he was gone. A month after that, she was in handcuffs. "I need to find out," Vera said, her voice stronger now. "I need to know what they took from me." "That's going to be dangerous," Vernon said. "The Dawsons won't like you poking around. Martin's not as mean as his daddy was, but he's got more to protect, more to lose." "I've already lost everything," Vera squared her shoulders. "I spent 30 years in a cell for something I didn't do. I lost my home, my family, my whole life. What else can they take from me?" Vernon studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. "My grandson," he said, handing it to her. "Tommy, he's a lawyer now, works in the city, but he comes home weekends sometimes. If you need help, legal help, you call him." Vera took the card and slid it into the pocket of her prison-issue pants. "Thank you, Vernon." "Don't thank me yet." He headed for the door, then stopped and turned back. "You remember Lila Perkins? Used to waitress at the diner?" "I remember her. She's the manager now. Been there 40 years. She's good people, and she remembers you. Remembers when your mama used to bring pie on Sundays." Vernon nodded toward the road. "You're going to need friends, Vera. You're going to need people who remember who you were before. Go see Lila. She'll help." And then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the morning quiet. Vera stood alone in the dust and the memories. She looked around the ruined store, at the life that had been stolen from her, at the decay that had taken root in the absence of love and care. Then she rolled up her sleeves. By noon, she had cleared a path from the door to the counter. It wasn't much, but it was something. She'd found an old broom in the back room, its bristles worn down to almost nothing, and she'd swept up 3 decades of dust and debris into a pile near the door. Her arms ached, her back screamed, but she kept going. She found things as she cleaned. A photograph, faded and water-damaged, of her parents on their wedding day. A receipt book from 1989, the last year of business, with her own handwriting recording sales of cigarettes and milk and lottery tickets. A child's toy, a small plastic horse, that must have been dropped by some long-ago customer and kicked into a corner. And she found the cabinet. It was behind the counter, built into the wall, with a door that had swollen shut over the years. Vera had forgotten about it. Her father had called it the safe, though it wasn't a real safe, just a wooden cabinet with a good lock. He'd kept important papers in there, the deed to the land, insurance documents, tax records. She tried to open it, but the door wouldn't budge. The wood had expanded with years of moisture and neglect. She'd need tools, and she didn't have any. She added it to the list in her head. Tools, cleaning supplies, food, water, since the pipes were surely frozen or burst. A way to stay warm at night, since October in this part of the country got cold fast. She had $43. The reality of her situation settled over her like a weight. She had no money, no family, no friends except for Vernon and maybe Lila, if Vernon was right. She had a criminal record and an orange jumpsuit and a face that people in this town would remember, and not kindly. She had a building that was more ruin than shelter, on land that powerful people had been waiting 30 years to claim. What she didn't have was a choice. This was the only place she could go, the only thing that still belonged to her, if it even did. The only piece of her old life that had survived. She'd made a promise to her father, even if she hadn't understood it at the time. When the phone rings, you answer. Vera looked at the avocado green phone on the wall. Dead for 30 years. Disconnected, forgotten, left to gather dust like everything else. But her father had known something. He'd known, and he'd tried to tell her. And then Earl Dawson had made sure she couldn't hear. 30 years was a long time to wait. But Vera Mitchell was good at waiting. She picked up the broom and kept sweeping. The sun was setting by the time she stopped working. Her whole body hurt in ways she'd forgotten were possible. Prison had kept her active. She'd worked in the laundry, lifted heavy loads, walked the yard, but this was different. This was the kind of tired that came from doing something that mattered. She sat on an overturned crate near the window and watched the sky turn orange, then pink, then purple. The road was quiet. Only a few cars had passed all day, and none of them had stopped. Most of them had slowed, though. She'd felt their eyes on the building, on the woman in the prison clothes, working alone in the ruins. Let them look, let them wonder. She didn't care anymore what people thought. A car did stop, just as the last light was fading from the sky. A small sedan, old but well-maintained. A woman got out, gray-haired, wearing an apron under her coat, carrying a paper bag and a thermos. Lila Perkins. She walked up to the door, which Vera had propped open with a brick, and stood there for a moment, looking at Vera with an expression that was hard to read. Vernon called me, Lila said finally. Told me you were back. I'm back. Lila nodded slowly. She held up the bag and the thermos. Brought you some dinner, pot roast and mashed potatoes, coffee in the thermos. Sugar's already in. I remember you used to take it sweet. Vera felt her throat tighten. She hadn't expected kindness. She'd prepared herself for hostility, for suspicion, for being chased away. She hadn't prepared for pot roast. Thank you, she managed. Lila came in and set the food on the counter, pushing aside some of the dust with her sleeve. She looked around at the work Vera had done, at the cleared path and the swept corners and the growing pile of debris by the door. You planning to fix this place up? I'm planning to live here, Vera said. For now, at least, until I figure things out. You can't live here, Vera. Look at this place. It's not fit for... It's mine. The words came out harder than she intended. She softened her voice. I know it doesn't look like much, but it's mine. My father built it. My mother died in the apartment upstairs. This is the only home I've got left. Lila was quiet for a moment. Then she sighed and sat down on another crate, settling in like she planned to stay for a while. I remember your mother, Lila said. She used to bring pie to the diner every Sunday after church. Pecan pie, mostly. Sometimes apple. She'd stay and talk to my mama for hours. They were friends, you know. Good friends. Vera nodded. She remembered. Your mama never believed you did it, Lila continued. She said it right up until the day she died. Said her daughter was innocent, and anyone who knew you would know that. She died while I was in prison, Vera said. They wouldn't let me come to the funeral. I know. I was there. Half the town was there. Lila reached over and took Vera's hand, her grip warm and strong. And I'll tell you something else. Half the town felt guilty as hell, because they knew, we all knew, that something wasn't right about that trial. But Earl Dawson was powerful, and people were scared, and it was easier to believe the story than to ask the hard questions. And now? Lila smiled, but it was sad. Now Earl's dead, and his son's not as scary, and folks have had 30 years to live with their guilt. Some of them, anyway. She squeezed Vera's hand. You're going to find that some people in this town want to make things right, and you're going to find that others will fight you every step of the way. But you're not alone, Vera. I want you to know that. You're not alone. Vera couldn't speak. She just nodded, holding onto Lila's hand like it was a lifeline. Now, Lila said, standing up and brushing off her apron, eat that dinner before it gets cold. I'll bring breakfast tomorrow, and I'll ask around, see if anyone's got some spare blankets, maybe a space heater you can borrow. This building's not insulated, and October nights get cold. Lila, hush. You'd do the same for me, and we both know it. Lila headed for the door, then stopped and looked back. Your daddy was a good man, Vera. One of the best I ever knew. He wouldn't want to see you suffer. But I think he'd be proud to see you fighting. And then she was gone too, leaving Vera alone with a warm meal and the first hope she'd felt in 30 years. She ate the pot roast slowly, savoring every bite. When was the last time someone had cooked for her? Not the prison cafeteria, where everything tasted like nothing. Not the halfway house, where meals came from cans and microwaves. This was real food, made by real hands, given with real kindness. After she finished, she wiped her eyes. When had she started crying? And got up to explore what remained of the upstairs apartment where she'd grown up. The stairs creaked dangerously, but they held her weight. The apartment was in worse shape than the store below, with water damage from the leaking roof and evidence that animals had been living there for years. But her old bedroom was still recognizable. The wallpaper she'd picked out when she was 16, tiny blue flowers on a white background, was peeling but still there. She found a corner that was relatively dry and relatively clean. She spread out the extra shirt from her plastic bag as a pillow. She lay down on the bare wooden floor, pulling her arms into her sleeves for warmth. And somewhere in the dark, as she drifted towards sleep, she heard something that made her heart stop. The phone was ringing. Vera's eyes flew open in the darkness. The ringing continued, shrill, insistent, impossibly loud in the silence of the abandoned building. The old rotary phone, the avocado green one her mother had ordered from a catalog in 1971, the one that had been disconnected for 30 years. It was ringing. She scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The floorboards groaned beneath her as she moved toward the stairs. She couldn't see anything. The power was out, had been out for decades, but she knew this building by memory, by the map written into her bones. Down the stairs, one hand on the railing, testing each step before putting her full weight on it, through the back room where her father used to do inventory, into the main store, where the moonlight through the grimy windows cast everything in shades of silver and shadow. The phone kept ringing. Vera stood in front of it, her hand trembling as she reached for the receiver. This was impossible. She knew it was impossible, and yet her father's voice echoed in her memory, as clear as if he were standing beside her. When the phone rings, you answer. Promise me. She picked up the receiver. Hello? silence. Then static, the kind that sounded like distance, like the signal was traveling through time as much as space. And then a voice. A woman's voice, old and tired and achingly familiar. "Vera? Vera, honey, is that you?" Vera's knees buckled. She grabbed the counter to keep from falling. "Mama?" But that was impossible. Her mother had died 12 years ago, alone in a nursing home while Vera sat in a prison cell 200 miles away, denied permission to say goodbye. "Listen to me, baby." The voice was fading, crackling with interference. "I don't have much time. You need to find the letters. Your daddy's letters. They're in the cabinet, behind the false back. He hid them there before he died. They'll tell you everything. Everything the Dawsons took from us. Mama, I don't understand. The well, Vera, it was never dry. Your daddy found something down there, something valuable, and Earl Dawson found out. That's why they did what they did. That's why they took everything from us." The static grew louder, swallowing the words. "Mama, wait. I love you, baby. I always believed in you. Now you find those letters, and you make them pay for what they did." The line went dead. Vera stood frozen, the receiver still pressed to her ear, listening to nothing. Her whole body was shaking. Sweat had broken out on her forehead despite the cold. Had she imagined it? Was she finally losing her mind after 30 years? Prison did that to people sometimes, made them see things, hear things, believe things that weren't real. But the phone was real, heavy and solid in her hand, and when she looked down at the base of it, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A small red light, barely visible in the darkness, blinking slowly. The phone was connected to something. She didn't sleep the rest of that night. She sat on the floor behind the counter, her back against the wall, watching the phone like it might ring again at any moment. Her mind raced through explanations. Someone had reconnected the line as a prank. Someone had installed some kind of recording device. Someone was trying to scare her away. But that voice had been her mother's. She would have known it anywhere, in any circumstance, after any amount of time. The slight rasp from years of working in the textile mill before she married. The way she said, "baby" with 2 syllables, "baby," drawing it out like a song. No recording could capture that. No impersonator could replicate it. When the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the windows, Vera got up and went to the cabinet behind the counter, the one with the swollen door that wouldn't open. She needed tools. Vernon arrived at 8 o'clock with a toolbox and a thermos of coffee. "Lila called me," he said by way of explanation, setting the toolbox on the counter. "Said you looked like you could use some help. The phone rang last night." Vernon stopped in the middle of pouring coffee into a cup. He looked at her, then at the phone on the wall, then back at her. "That phone's been dead for 30 years. I know. The line was cut. I watched them do it. I know." Vera took the coffee he offered, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "But it rang, and I answered it. And someone—" She stopped, not sure how to continue. It sounded crazy. It sounded like exactly the kind of thing a woman who'd spent 3 decades in prison might imagine. "Someone what?" "Someone told me to look in the cabinet, behind the false back, said there were letters hidden there. Letters my father wrote before he died." Vernon was quiet for a long moment. He set down the thermos and walked over to the cabinet, studying it with the careful eye of a man who'd worked with his hands his whole life. "Your daddy built this," he said finally. "I remember when he put it in. Must have been, 1975? 1976? He was particular about it. Wouldn't let anyone help. Said it was special. Do you know what he hid in there?" "No." Vernon shook his head. "But I know he was scared. That last year, before he got sick, he kept talking about insurance, about making sure you and your mama would be taken care of. I thought he meant life insurance, the regular kind. But now," he turned back to face her, and there was something new in his expression, something that looked almost like hope. "Let's open it." The cabinet door came off its hinges after 20 minutes of work with a pry bar and a hammer. The wood was soft from water damage, practically crumbling in places, but the frame held together long enough for them to remove it in one piece. Inside, the cabinet was mostly empty. A few old papers, too water-damaged to read. A rusted lockbox with nothing inside. Mouse droppings and the husks of dead insects. But Vernon had noticed what Vera hadn't. The back of the cabinet sat slightly forward from the wall, just half an inch, maybe less, but enough to suggest there was space behind it. "Hand me that screwdriver." 5 more minutes, and the false back came loose. Behind it was a metal box, about the size of a shoebox, wrapped in plastic that had kept it dry all these years. Vera pulled it out with trembling hands and set it on the counter. "You should open it alone," Vernon said quietly. "Whatever's in there, it's for you." "No." Vera shook her head. "You were his friend. You've believed in me when no one else did. You should see this too." She unwrapped the plastic and opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in her father's careful handwriting, addressed to her. Each envelope was dated, starting 6 months before his death and continuing right up until the week he went into the hospital for the last time. And beneath the letters was something else, a geological survey, official-looking, with stamps and signatures and detailed maps, and a small velvet pouch that clinked when she picked it up. She opened the pouch and poured its contents into her palm. Nuggets. Small ones, but unmistakable. Gold, gleaming even in the dim light of the abandoned store. "Lord have mercy," Vernon breathed. The letters told the story her father had never had the chance to share. It started in 1985, the year before he got sick. He'd been doing some work on the property, fixing a fence, he wrote, that ran along the back boundary near the old capped well. The ground had been soft from spring rains, and his post-hole digger had struck something hard about 3 feet down. He dug further, curious, and found a vein of quartz shot through with gold. "I didn't tell anyone at first," he wrote in one of the early letters. "Not even your mother. I wasn't sure what I'd found, or what it meant. I sent samples to a geologist in the city, paid cash, used a fake name. He told me what I already suspected. The vein is significant. Not enough to make us millionaires, but enough to change our lives. Enough to pay for your education, to expand the store, to secure the family's future for generations." But he hadn't been as careful as he thought. Someone had seen him sending those samples. Someone had talked to someone else. And eventually, word had reached Earl Dawson. "Earl came to see me last month," her father wrote, in a letter dated 3 months before his death. "He offered to buy the land. Offered a fair price. I'll give him that. More than fair, actually, which was my first clue that he knew. I told him no. This land has been in our family for 4 generations. I won't be the one to sell it." He didn't take it well. Told me I'd regret it. Told me things have a way of happening to people who don't know what's good for them. I've known Earl Dawson for 40 years, and I've never liked him, but I never thought he was capable of real evil. Now I'm not so sure. The final letters were the hardest to read. Her father had grown suspicious of everyone. He'd started hiding evidence, making copies of documents, creating a paper trail that he hoped would protect his family if anything happened to him. He'd written down everything he knew about Earl Dawson's attempts to acquire the land, the bribes, the threats, the systematic campaign to isolate the Mitchell family from their neighbors and friends. "I'm sick, Vera," he wrote in the last letter. "The doctors say it's cancer, and I don't think I have long. I wanted to tell you all of this in person, but I'm running out of time, and I'm afraid of what they might do if they know I've told you. So, I'm hiding these letters where only you will find them. The phone, Vera. I've set it up so that your mother can reach you, no matter what. No matter where you are. It's connected to something bigger than wires. Something I don't fully understand myself. But when it rings, you answer. You answer, and you listen, and you fight. They're going to try to take everything from us. I can feel it coming, but they don't know about the letters. They don't know about the evidence, and they don't know my daughter. You're stronger than they are, Vera. You're smarter. You're better. And when the time comes, you'll make things right. I love you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better, but I believe in you. I've always believed in you." Vera set down the final letter and wept. Vernon sat with her while she cried. He didn't try to comfort her with words. He understood that some grief was too big for that. He just sat beside her, a steady presence, waiting for her to find her way through. When she finally stopped, when the tears had run dry and her breathing had steadied, she looked at him with eyes that burned with something fiercer than sorrow. "They killed him," she said. "Earl Dawson killed my father. We don't know that for certain. The cancer. It came on so fast. Everyone said so at the time. 1 month he was fine, the next he was dying." Vera picked up one of the letters, pointing to a passage. "He says here that Earl had connections in the medical community, that he'd heard rumors about people getting sick after crossing the Dawsons. What if—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The possibility was too monstrous. "Even if that's true," Vernon said carefully, "proving it after all this time would be almost impossible. Maybe, but proving the fraud, proving that they set me up, that might not be." Vera gathered the letters, the geological survey, the gold nuggets, and placed them carefully back in the box. "My father kept records of everything. Names, dates, amounts. He knew they were going to come after us, and he prepared. What are you going to do?" Vera looked around the ruined store, at the work she'd done, and the work still left to do. She thought about her mother's voice on the phone, impossible and real. She thought about 30 years of her life stolen, 30 years of watching the world move on without her, 30 years of being told she was a thief and a liar when she knew she was neither. "I'm going to finish cleaning this place up," she said. "I'm going to make it a home again, and then I'm going to find out exactly what the Dawsons took from us, and I'm going to take it back." Vernon nodded slowly. "That won't be easy. Martin Dawson may not be as mean as his daddy, but he's got money, lawyers, connections. He owns half the businesses in this town. I don't care about easy." Vera's voice was steel. "I care about justice." Word spread fast in a small town. By the end of that first week, everyone in Millbrook knew that Vera Mitchell was back. They knew she was living in the old gas station. They knew she was cleaning it up, restoring it, making it livable again. And they knew, or thought they knew, what that meant. Some people were curious. They drove by slowly, craning their necks to see what she was doing, maybe hoping for a glimpse of the woman who'd spent 30 years in prison. Some of them waved. Most didn't. Some people were sympathetic. They left things on the front step when she wasn't looking: a bag of groceries, a box of cleaning supplies, a warm blanket still in its plastic packaging. Vera never saw who left these gifts, but she felt their weight. Small kindnesses from people who maybe felt guilty, or maybe just remembered who she used to be. And some people were hostile. She'd find her work undone in the mornings, garbage dumped on the lot she'd cleared, graffiti sprayed on the walls she'd scrubbed. Once, someone threw a rock through one of the windows she'd just replaced, shattering it into 1,000 pieces. She cleaned up the mess and replaced the window again. She wasn't going anywhere. Lila came by every day with food and company. Vernon stopped in most mornings with tools and advice. Tommy, Vernon's grandson, the lawyer, called from the city to say he'd reviewed the letters and found them very interesting. And would she be willing to meet with him when he came home that weekend? She would. She very much would. And through it all, Vera worked. She scrubbed and swept and painted and repaired. She got the water running again, with help from a sympathetic plumber who remembered her father. She got the electricity turned on, which required a visit to the county office and a payment she could barely afford, but which was worth it for the simple miracle of light. The phone never rang again, but she kept it there, mounted on the wall, avocado green and waiting. She knew now that it wasn't just a phone. Her father had connected it to something else, something he didn't fully understand himself, according to his letters. Something that had allowed her mother to reach across the void and deliver one final message. She didn't question it. Some things were beyond questioning. You just accepted them and moved forward. Martin Dawson came to visit on a Thursday afternoon, 9 days after Vera's return. She was on a ladder, painting the trim above the front door, when his Mercedes pulled into the lot. She recognized the car before she recognized the man. It was the kind of vehicle that didn't belong in this part of the county, all gleaming black paint and chrome that probably cost more than her father had made in a year. The man who got out was in his 50s, with the soft hands and expensive clothes of someone who'd never done physical labor. His hair was silver at the temples, artfully styled. His smile was practiced, professional, the smile of a man who was used to getting what he wanted. "Miss Mitchell," he said, approaching the ladder. "I'm Martin Dawson. I don't think we've formally met." Vera continued painting. "I know who you are. I wanted to welcome you back to Millbrook and to express my sympathies for everything you've been through." She stopped painting then, looked down at him from her perch on the ladder. "Your sympathies. What happened to you was a tragedy. Everyone agrees on that. What happened to me was a crime." Vera's voice was calm, level. "A crime your father committed." Martin's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly. "My father was many things, Miss Mitchell, but he wasn't a criminal. The courts were wrong." A tense silence stretched between them. Martin's smile disappeared entirely, replaced by something harder, more calculating. "I came here to make you an offer," he said. "A generous offer, considering the circumstances. This property has been abandoned for 30 years. It's an eyesore, a hazard. The county's been after us to do something about it for decades." "Us?" "Dawson Holdings has been paying the back taxes on this property since the late 90s. Without our support, the county would have seized it years ago, sold it at auction. You'd have nothing." Vera climbed down from the ladder, wiping her hands on her work pants. She stood face to face with Martin Dawson, close enough to smell his cologne, close enough to see the tiny beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool October air. "Why would you pay taxes on a property you don't own?" "Out of respect for your family, for the memory of your parents." "Respect?" Vera almost laughed. "Your father destroyed my family. He stole from us, lied about us, sent me to prison for something I didn't do. And now you want to talk about respect?" Martin's composure slipped further. She could see the anger beneath his polished surface, the Dawson temper that his father had been famous for. "I'm offering you $200,000 for this property," he said, his voice tight. "Cash. You could start over somewhere else. Somewhere without." He gestured vaguely at the surroundings. "All these memories. This property isn't for sale. Everything is for sale, Miss Mitchell. It's just a matter of finding the right price." Vera stepped closer, so close she could see herself reflected in his expensive sunglasses. "Your father said the same thing to mine 30 years ago, and my father told him no. So I'm telling you no. This land belongs to the Mitchells. It always has. It always will. And no amount of Dawson money is going to change that." Martin's face went red. For a moment, Vera thought he might actually hit her. She could see the impulse flash across his features, the clenched fists, the tightened jaw, but he controlled himself. The smile came back, though now it looked more like a grimace. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly. "A very serious mistake. This town belongs to my family. It has for 3 generations. Everyone here owes us something. Their jobs, their mortgages, their children's scholarships. One word from me, and you'll find yourself very alone, Miss Mitchell. Very alone indeed. I've been alone for 30 years. I'm used to it." She turned her back on him and climbed back up the ladder. "I came here trying to be reasonable," Martin called after her. "I came here offering you a way out, a chance to walk away with something. But if you want to do this the hard way, fine. We'll do it the hard way." Vera dipped her brush in the paint can and resumed her work on the trim. "Don't say I didn't warn you," Martin said, and she heard his footsteps retreating, the car door slamming, the engine starting. She didn't look back. She kept painting, stroke after stroke, until the Mercedes had disappeared down the road, and the only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant song of birds. Then, very quietly, she smiled. Let them come. Let them threaten. Let them do their worst. She had her father's letters. She had the truth, and she had something the Dawsons had never counted on. She had nothing left to lose. That night, she sat at the counter going through the geological survey again, trying to understand what her father had found. The vein ran deep, according to the report. It originated somewhere beneath the old well and extended in a northwesterly direction, possibly for hundreds of feet. The geologist had estimated its value at several $1,000,000, assuming it could be accessed without prohibitive cost. Several $1,000,000, sitting beneath her feet all these years. No wonder the Dawsons had been so desperate. No wonder they'd paid the taxes, kept the property tied up, waited for the right moment to swoop in. They'd known about the gold all along. They'd killed for it, or at least she believed they had. And they'd stolen 30 years of her life to get it. But they hadn't gotten it. Not yet. The mine was still there, waiting. The evidence was still there, preserved in her father's careful handwriting. And she was still there, against all odds, ready to fight. The phone rang. Vera froze, her hand hovering over the geological survey. She turned slowly to look at the avocado-green phone on the wall. It rang again, that shrill, old-fashioned ring that shouldn't have been possible. She stood up, walked to the phone, and lifted the receiver. Hello? Static, distance. And then, Vera. A man's voice this time, familiar in a different way, in a way that made her blood run cold. I was wondering when you'd find those letters. She knew that voice. She'd heard it in her nightmares for 30 years. Earl, she whispered. Earl Dawson. A dry, papery laugh came through the line. Surprised? Don't be. I always said this land was special. Your daddy knew it. I knew it. And now you know it too. You're dead. Dead. Yes. But not gone. Not from this place. Another laugh, but it died away into something that sounded almost like sorrow. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, Vera. I'm sorry for what I did. There's no peace for me now, no rest. Just this. Calling, waiting, watching, paying for my sins. You should be sorry. Vera's voice shook with 30 years of rage. You destroyed my family. You stole everything from us. I know what I did, and I'm paying for it, believe me. But that's not why I called. Earl's voice grew urgent, fading like her mother's had. Martin doesn't know everything. He thinks he does, but he doesn't. The well, Vera. The well isn't just gold. It's something else, something older, something that's been waiting a long time for someone like you. What are you talking about? The phone. How do you think the phone works? How do you think the dead can call the living? Static surged, drowning out his words. It's connected to the well. It's all connected. Your father discovered more than gold down there. He discovered. The line went dead. Vera stood holding the receiver, her heart pounding, her mind reeling. What had Earl Dawson been trying to tell her? What had her father found in that well, besides gold? And what did it mean that even the dead couldn't rest until this land revealed its secrets? She hung up the phone slowly, carefully, and turned to look out the window at the overgrown field behind the store, where the old well sat somewhere beneath the weeds and the darkness. Tomorrow, she will start digging. Dawn found Vera standing at the edge of the overgrown field behind the store, staring at the spot where she remembered the well being capped. The vegetation had claimed everything. Waist-high weeds, tangled brush, young saplings that had grown unchecked for 3 decades. Somewhere beneath all that green chaos was a concrete cap her grandfather had poured in 1955 when the well supposedly went dry. Except it hadn't gone dry. Her father's letters made that clear. The well had never been dry. It had been sealed for other reasons, reasons her grandfather had taken to his grave. And now, according to the ghost of Earl Dawson, there was something down there besides gold, something older, something waiting. Vera didn't believe in ghosts. At least, she hadn't believed in them until a dead phone started ringing, and voices she knew, voices belonging to people who'd been in the ground for years, started speaking to her through the static. Maybe prison had driven her crazy after all. Maybe none of this was real. But the letters were real. The gold nuggets were real. The geological survey was real. And the Dawsons' desperation to get their hands on this land, that was real too. She pulled on the work gloves Lila had given her and started clearing brush. By noon, her arms were scratched and bleeding, her back ached like fire, and she'd only cleared about a quarter of the area she needed to search. The October sun was weak but persistent, and sweat soaked through her shirt despite the cool air. She was resting against a tree, drinking water from a bottle, when she heard a car pull into the lot. For a moment, her heart seized. Martin Dawson, come back to make good on his threats. But the vehicle that appeared around the side of the building was an old Ford pickup, not a Mercedes. and the man who got out was young, maybe 30, with Vernon's eyes and an easy smile. "You must be Vera," he said, approaching with his hand extended. "I'm Tommy. Grandpa sent me." Tommy Dockery, the lawyer grandson. Vera shook his hand, noting the calluses that suggested he hadn't completely abandoned his country roots despite his city career. "He said you'd be by this weekend." "Couldn't wait." Tommy looked past her at the cleared patch of field, at the work she'd been doing. "Grandpa showed me those letters. And the survey. I've been doing some research." "What kind of research?" "The kind that could put some very powerful people in prison." Tommy's smile faded into something more serious. "Can we talk inside?" They sat at the counter, the box of letters between them. Tommy had brought his own documents, printouts, legal filings, old newspaper clippings, and he spread them out like pieces of a puzzle he was still assembling. "First things first," he said. "The geological survey your father commissioned, it was never filed with the county. No permits, no claims, nothing official. Which means the Dawsons don't have any legal right to what's down there." "Exactly. But it also means you don't either. Not yet." Tommy pulled out a form. "We need to file a mineral rights claim. Get ahead of them before they realize what you found." Vera nodded slowly. "What else?" Tommy hesitated. He was younger than she'd expected, with an earnestness that reminded her of his grandfather. But there was something else in his expression now, something that looked like anger barely controlled. "I've been looking into your trial," he said. "The original case, reading the transcripts, the evidence logs, the witness statements. And it stinks, Vera. It stinks to high heaven." He pulled out a thick folder. "The money you were accused of stealing, $47,000 from the store's accounts over 18 months. The prosecution claimed you'd been skimming cash, falsifying records, hiding the money in a secret account. I know what they claimed. I was there. But here's what doesn't add up." Tommy opened the folder. "The forensic accountant who testified against you, he was hired by Earl Dawson's law firm. Not the state, not the prosecution. Dawson's personal attorneys found him and recommended him. The bank records that supposedly proved the theft, they came from a branch manager who owed Dawson money. The anonymous tip that started the investigation in the first place, it came from a payphone outside Dawson Holdings." Vera felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd known, of course. She'd always known she was innocent, that the evidence had been manufactured. But hearing it laid out like this, seeing the pattern so clearly, it was different. It made the injustice feel fresh again, raw and bleeding. "Can you prove any of this?" "Some of it. Maybe." Tommy leaned forward. "But here's the thing. I don't think I need to prove it. I think someone else already did." He pulled out one more document. This one was older, yellowed with age, typed on a manual typewriter. "This is a sworn affidavit," Tommy said, "dated 1997. It's from a man named Douglas Pratt. He was the branch manager at the bank, the one who provided the records that convicted you." Vera took the paper with trembling hands. "He wrote this 8 years after your trial," Tommy continued. "He says Earl Dawson paid him $20,000 to falsify the bank records. He says he knew you were innocent. He says he's lived with the guilt ever since, and he wanted to set the record straight before he died." "Where did you get this?" "The county clerk's office. It was filed in the public records in 1997, but nobody ever did anything with it. Nobody ever followed up." Tommy's voice was tight with controlled fury. "Douglas Pratt died 2 months after filing this. Heart attack, just like Earl Dawson, just like a lot of people who crossed the Dawsons over the years." Vera stared at the affidavit. The words blurred as tears filled her eyes. "Why?" she whispered. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Why didn't anyone?" "Because the system failed you." Tommy reached across the counter and put his hand over hers. "Because the people who should have been watching weren't watching. Because the Dawsons owned this town, and everyone was too scared or too bought to do the right thing." He squeezed her hand. "But that ends now. I'm filing a motion to vacate your conviction based on new evidence of prosecutorial misconduct and witness tampering. It's going to take time, maybe months, but we're going to clear your name, Vera. We're going to prove what they did to you." Vera couldn't speak. 30 years of being called a thief, a liar, a criminal. 30 years of carrying the weight of a crime she didn't commit. And now, finally, someone with the power to do something about it was on her side. "There's more," Tommy said. "About the land. About what your father found." He pulled out another document. This one a map, old and hand-drawn, with markings she didn't recognize. "I found this in the County Historical Archive. It's from 1892, when your great-great-grandfather first homesteaded this property." Tommy pointed to a symbol near the center of the map. "See this? It's marked as a spirit well. The original survey notes say the indigenous people who lived here considered it sacred. They believed it was a gateway between worlds." A gateway. I know how it sounds. But your father's letters mention the phone, right? How he set it up to connect to something bigger than wires. And you said you've been getting calls from... Tommy paused, choosing his words carefully. "From people who shouldn't be able to call." Vera thought about her mother's voice crackling through the static, about Earl Dawson's ghost, warning her of things he had no right to know. "The well isn't just gold," she said slowly. "Earl said that before the line went dead. He said my father found something else down there, something older." Tommy nodded. "I think your father discovered what the indigenous people already knew, that there's something special about this place. Something that goes beyond geology or mining rights or money. But the Dawsons only care about the gold. They don't understand the rest. They don't believe in it." Tommy gathered his papers. "But I think that's our advantage. They're so focused on what they can measure and sell that they're missing the bigger picture." He stood up. "I need to get back to the city, file these motions, start the legal process. But I'll be back next weekend, and I'll bring help. Friends from law school who believe in doing the right thing." He paused at the door. "In the meantime, be careful. The Dawsons are going to escalate. They're going to try everything they can to force you out before this gets to court." "I'm not leaving." "I know." Tommy smiled, and for a moment he looked exactly like his grandfather. "That's what Grandpa said you'd say." The escalation started the next day. Vera woke to the sound of engines, big ones, diesel, rumbling through the morning quiet. She scrambled to the window and saw 2 trucks parked at the edge of her property, men in hard hats climbing out with surveying equipment. She was outside in seconds, still in the clothes she'd slept in, marching toward the trucks with a fury that surprised even herself. "This is private property," she called out. "You're trespassing." The man who seemed to be in charge, middle-aged, beer belly straining against his safety vest, looked up from his clipboard with barely concealed contempt. "Ma'am, we're here on behalf of Dawson Holdings. We have authorization to conduct a preliminary land survey." "Authorization from who?" "I didn't authorize anything." "From the county." He thrust a paper at her. "Environmental assessment, required by law for properties that have been abandoned for more than 20 years. Vera snatched the paper and scanned it. It looked official, county letterhead, stamps, signatures, but something about it felt wrong. "This is dated yesterday," she said. "How convenient." "I just do what I'm told, ma'am. Now if you'll step aside." "No." The word came out hard and flat, brooking no argument. "No, I will not step aside. No, you will not survey my land. And no, I don't care what papers the Dawsons have paid someone to forge." Vera stepped closer to the foreman, close enough that he had to take a step back. "This property belongs to me. My family has owned it for 4 generations, and no amount of bureaucratic harassment is going to change that." The foreman's face reddened. "Lady, I'm trying to be polite here. Then try harder somewhere else." A tense silence stretched between them. The other workers had stopped what they were doing, watching the confrontation with uncomfortable expressions. Then Vera heard another engine, this one familiar. Vernon's pickup came bouncing down the road, kicking up dust, and pulled to a stop right in front of the survey trucks, blocking them in. Vernon got out slowly, his movements deliberate, and walked over to stand beside Vera. "Morning, Frank," he said to the foreman. "Having some trouble?" Frank's expression shifted from annoyance to wariness. "Vernon, didn't expect to see you here." "I expect there's a lot you didn't expect." Vernon crossed his arms. Like the fact that I've been calling around all morning, talked to the county clerk, talked to the permits office, even talked to Sheriff Davis, who's a personal friend. He let that sink in. Turns out that authorization you're waving around, it's not worth the paper it's printed on. The county never approved any environmental assessment for this property. Someone created that document without proper authority. Frank's face went from red to white. I was told. I know what you were told. And I know who told you. Vernon's voice was pleasant, but there was steel underneath. Now, you've got a choice. You can pack up your equipment and leave quietly, and we'll all pretend this little misunderstanding never happened. Or you can stay here and wait for Sheriff Davis to arrive with his deputies. Your call. The foreman looked at his crew, at the blocked trucks, at the two people standing firm against him. Whatever Martin Dawson was paying him, it clearly wasn't enough for this kind of trouble. Load up, he muttered to his men. We're done here. Vernon and Vera stood side by side, watching as the trucks maneuvered their way off the property and disappeared down the road. Thank you, Vera said quietly. Don't mention it. Vernon turned to her, his expression serious. But that was just the first shot. They're going to keep coming, Vera. Different angles, different tactics. They're going to try to exhaust you, scare you, wear you down. I know. Do you have a plan? Vera looked back at the overgrown field, at the place where the well waited beneath decades of neglect. I'm going to find out what my father discovered, she said. I'm going to dig up every secret this land has been hiding, and then I'm going to make sure the whole world knows what the Dawsons did. That afternoon, she found the well cap. It was exactly where she remembered, about 50 yards behind the store, slightly elevated on a natural rise in the land. The concrete was cracked and weathered, overgrown with moss and lichen, but still solid after all these years. Her grandfather had done good work. Vera cleared the vegetation around the cap, revealing its full circumference, about 4 feet across, with rusted metal handles on opposite sides for lifting. There were markings etched into the concrete, symbols she didn't recognize. They might have been made when the cap was poured, or they might have been added later. Either way, they looked deliberate. She tried the handles. They didn't budge. Need some help with that? Vera spun around. A woman stood at the edge of the cleared area. Young, maybe late 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and dirt on her knees like she'd been doing some digging of her own. I'm sorry, the woman said, holding up her hands. I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm an archaeologist with the State University. An archaeologist? Tommy Dockery called me. Said you might have discovered something historically significant on your property. Sarah approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the well cap with obvious professional interest. He wasn't wrong. She crouched beside the cap, running her fingers over the etched symbols. These are old, she murmured. Pre-contact, if I had to guess. The indigenous peoples of this region had extensive oral traditions about sacred sites, places where they believed the boundaries between worlds were thin. Spirit wells, Vera said, remembering Tommy's research. Sarah looked up, surprised. You know about that? I'm learning. Sarah stood, brushing off her hands. Look, Miss Mitchell, Vera, I know this must seem overwhelming. You've got land disputes and legal battles and who knows what else going on. But whatever's under this cap could be genuinely important. Not just valuable, important. Culturally, historically, maybe even scientifically. What do you mean scientifically? Sarah hesitated. There are stories, she said carefully. Stories from researchers who've studied sites like this, about anomalous readings, equipment malfunctions, phenomena that don't fit our current understanding of physics. Like phones that ring without being connected? Sarah's eyes widened slightly. Tommy mentioned something about that. I thought he was exaggerating. He wasn't. They stood in silence for a moment, looking at the well cap with its mysterious symbols. Help me open it, Vera said finally. It took both of them, plus a crowbar and 2 hours of effort, to break the seal on the well cap. The concrete had fused to the stone beneath it over decades, and the metal handles had rusted almost solid. But eventually, with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh, the cap came free. Vera had expected darkness. She'd expected the dank smell of stagnant water, the musty breath of a sealed space. What she got was light, soft, golden, emanating from somewhere deep below, a glow that had no business existing in a well that had been sealed for nearly 70 years. "That's not possible," Sarah breathed. Vera leaned over the opening, squinting against the glow. The well shaft was about 15 feet deep, lined with stones her grandfather had placed by hand. At the bottom, instead of water, there was a chamber. She could see the edges of it, the hint of a larger space opening up beyond the narrow shaft. And in that space, something glowed. "We need to go down there," Vera said. "We need to call someone, document this properly, get a team. There's no time." Vera was already looking around for something to use as a rope. The Dawsons tried to survey this land today. They'll try again. They'll get a real court order, a real legal process. If we don't find out what's down there before they do, then they'll take it, Sarah finished, just like they tried to take everything else. She was quiet for a moment, wrestling with professional ethics and practical reality. "I have climbing gear in my car," she said finally. "I always carry it for field work." Vera met her eyes. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. We don't know what we're going to find down there." Sarah had rigged a proper harness and belay system, anchored to her truck's trailer hitch. The climbing rope was new and strong, rated for far more weight than Vera carried. Still, her heart pounded as she lowered herself down the stone-lined shaft, the golden glow growing brighter with every foot she descended. The walls were damp but not wet. There was no water at the bottom, just smooth stone, worn by centuries of feet that had walked here before the well was even dug. This wasn't a well. She understood that now. It was an entrance. Her feet touched bottom, and she unclipped from the rope, turning slowly to take in her surroundings. The chamber was roughly circular, maybe 20 feet across, with a ceiling that arched overhead like a natural cathedral. The walls were covered in paintings, ancient, faded, but still visible. Figures in ochre and charcoal, depicting scenes she didn't fully understand. People gathered around a central point, light emanating from the earth, hands raised in reverence or supplication. And in the center of the chamber, on a natural stone pedestal, sat the source of the glow. It was a crystal, or something like a crystal, roughly the size of a human head, faceted in ways that seemed to defy geometry, pulsing with that soft golden light that had drawn her down here. Vera approached it slowly, her breath catching in her throat. As she got closer, she began to hear something. Voices, faint at first, like whispers from another room, but growing clearer. She recognized some of them, her mother, her father, her grandmother who had died when Vera was 12. And underneath those familiar voices, older ones. Voices that spoke in languages she didn't understand, that seemed to come from the stone itself. "The phone," Vera murmured, understanding dawning. "This is how the phone works. This is what my father found." She reached out toward the crystal. "Vera, wait." Sarah's voice echoed down from above, but Vera's fingers had already brushed the surface. The world went white. She was standing in the store, Mitchell's country store, but it wasn't ruined. It was alive, vibrant, exactly as she remembered it from childhood. The candy jars were full. The cooler hummed with electricity. Sunlight streamed through clean windows, and her father stood behind the counter, exactly as he'd looked the last time she saw him healthy. "Vera," he said, smiling, "you found it." "Daddy?" Her voice cracked. Am I?" "You're not dead, baby girl. You're just visiting." He came around the counter and took her hands in his. His grip was warm, solid, real. The crystal connects all the times, all the places, all the people who've ever lived on this land. It's been here longer than anyone can remember. The first people who settled here knew about it. They protected it, kept it secret. But you found it. By accident. He shook his head ruefully. "I was digging fence posts and broke through into the chamber. The moment I touched the crystal, I understood. I understood everything, what the land was worth, what the Dawsons would do to get it, what would happen to you." Tears streamed down Vera's face. "If you knew, why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you warn me?" "I tried, baby. I tried so hard. His voice broke. But the crystal doesn't change what happens. It just shows what is, what was, what could be. I saw your suffering, and I couldn't prevent it. All I could do was leave you the tools to find justice when it was over. The letters, the phone connection. The phone is linked to the crystal. Anyone who's touched it can use it to communicate across the boundary. That's how your mama reached you. That's how Earl Dawson warned you. Earl Dawson. Vera's hands tightened on her father's. He said he was sorry. He is sorry. Dying doesn't erase guilt, it clarifies it. Earl's been trapped in his remorse for 6 years, watching his son make the same mistakes he did. Her father's expression grew serious. But that's why you need to be careful, Vera. The crystal shows truth. It connects souls. But it also attracts people who want to use its power for the wrong reasons. The Dawsons. Earl never knew what was really down here. He just knew the gold was valuable. But Martin's been researching. He's found records, stories, hints about what makes this land special. If he gets his hands on the crystal, the world began to fade, the bright store dimming around the edges. Wait, Vera said desperately. Don't go. I have so many questions. The crystal can only hold you for a few minutes. Any longer, and you'd be lost between worlds. Her father pulled her into a hug, and she sobbed against his chest like she was a child again. I'm so proud of you, baby girl. You survived. You stayed kind. You never gave up. I missed you so much. I know. I've been watching. I've always been watching. He pulled back, holding her face in his hands. Now go back. Find the documents in the chamber. There's a stone box in the eastern alcove. It has everything you need to prove what the Dawsons did. Then seal the well again. Protect the crystal. Don't let anyone misuse it. How do I protect it from Martin? Her father smiled sadly. By doing what Mitchells have always done, by standing your ground, by telling the truth, by being braver than your enemies. The light was fading faster now, her father's face becoming transparent. I love you, Daddy. I love you too, Vera. Always have, always will. And then she was falling back into her body, gasping, her hand still resting on the crystal as the golden glow pulsed once, twice, and settled back into its steady rhythm. Vera found the stone box exactly where her father had said it would be. The eastern alcove was small, barely large enough for her to crouch inside, hidden behind a natural curtain of rock that looked solid until you knew where to push. The box itself was ancient, carved from the same stone as the chamber walls, sealed with a lid that hadn't been opened in decades. Inside were documents, not old ones, but relatively recent, papers her father had placed here in the months before his death, preserved perfectly in the cool, dry air of the underground chamber. Bank statements showing deposits into Earl Dawson's accounts that corresponded exactly with the amounts Vera had supposedly stolen. Sworn statements from workers at Dawson Holdings who'd witnessed Earl discussing the Mitchell problem and how to solve it. Copies of forged documents, with notes in her father's handwriting explaining how he'd obtained them and what they proved. And at the very bottom, a letter addressed to whoever finds this. If you're reading this, then my daughter has done what I always knew she could. She survived. She came home. She found the truth. Everything in this box proves that Earl Dawson framed Vera for embezzlement. He paid witnesses, forged records, and bribed officials. He did it because I wouldn't sell him this land, and he knew that with me dying and Vera in prison, he could eventually take it. I couldn't stop what happened to my daughter. The crystal showed me her suffering, and I had to watch, helpless, knowing that interference would only make things worse. But I could prepare. I could gather evidence. I could leave her the weapons she'd need to fight back when the time was right. Use these documents wisely. The Dawsons are powerful, but they're not invincible. The truth has a weight of its own, and eventually, even the mightiest walls crumble under it. Henry Mitchell, April 1994. Vera pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Sarah helped her carry everything to the surface. The archaeologist was pale and shaken. She'd seen Vera touch the crystal, seen her go rigid and unresponsive for nearly 10 minutes, seen the glow intensify and then fade. What happened down there? Sarah asked, as they sealed the well cap back into place. I saw my father. Vera's voice was steady now, calm in a way it hadn't been since her return. He told me where to find what I needed. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's not scientifically possible. No, it's not. Vera looked at the sealed well, at the ancient symbols etched into the concrete. But it happened anyway. They carried the stone box into the store as the sun began to set. Sarah photographed every document, creating digital backups that she uploaded to 3 different cloud servers. Whatever happened next, the evidence would survive. I need to call Tommy, Vera said. He needs to see this. I'll stay tonight, Sarah offered. In case the Dawsons try anything. Vera shook her head. You've done enough. More than enough. But this next part, I need to do it alone. Are you sure? Vera looked around the store she'd been rebuilding, at the clean counter and the restocked shelves, and the phone on the wall that connected her to people who'd passed beyond the veil. I've been alone for 30 years, she said. I know how to handle it. Tommy arrived at dawn, having driven through the night after Vera's call. He spread the documents across the counter, his lawyer's mind cataloging and organizing, his face growing grimmer with each page he read. This is it, he said finally. This is everything we need. Bank records, witness statements, proof of forgery. Vera, this doesn't just prove your innocence. This proves criminal conspiracy, fraud, obstruction of justice, maybe even accessory to murder, if we can connect Earl to your father's illness. What do we do with it? We take it to the state attorney general, not the local DA. The Dawsons have too much influence here. We go over everyone's heads, straight to the top. Tommy began gathering the documents carefully. I know someone in the AG's office, law school classmate. She's been looking for a case like this, something that exposes systemic corruption in small-town justice systems. How long will it take? To clear your name? A few months, maybe? To put Martin Dawson in prison? Tommy's expression was hard. That depends on how much he knew about what his father did. If he was involved in maintaining the cover-up, if he's been actively working to keep you from discovering the truth, he has been. Vera told him about the fake survey authorization, about the threats Martin had made, about the systematic campaign to force her off the land. Tommy nodded slowly. Then we get him too. The next 3 weeks were a blur of meetings, depositions, and legal filings. Tommy's contact at the Attorney General's office turned out to be a fierce prosecutor named Angela Morris, who took one look at the evidence and declared it the most clear-cut case of conspiracy I've seen in 15 years. She assigned a team of investigators to dig deeper, and what they found was even worse than Vera had imagined. Earl Dawson hadn't just framed her for embezzlement. He'd orchestrated a decades-long campaign of corruption that touched every institution in the county. Judges who'd received gifts in exchange for favorable rulings. Police officers who'd looked the other way when Dawson employees committed crimes. County officials who'd approved permits and contracts in exchange for kickbacks. And Martin Dawson, far from being ignorant of his father's crimes, had been actively continuing them. The fake survey authorization was just the tip of the iceberg. He'd been paying the same bribes, maintaining the same corrupt relationships, using the same tactics to eliminate anyone who threatened his family's empire. The dominoes began to fall. First, Sheriff Davis, Vernon's personal friend, was arrested for accepting bribes. Then the county clerk who'd buried Douglas Pratt's affidavit for 25 years. Then 3 members of the county commission, 2 bank executives, and the judge who'd presided over Vera's original trial. And finally, on a cold November morning, Martin Dawson himself was taken into custody. Vera watched from the window of the store as the state police cruisers pulled up to the Dawson estate across the valley. She couldn't see the arrest itself, the distance was too great, but she could imagine it. The disbelief on Martin's face, the handcuffs clicking shut, the moment when he realized that all his money, all his power, all his connections couldn't save him from the consequences of what he and his father had done. It wasn't satisfaction she felt. It was something quieter, something that felt almost like release. Her conviction was formally vacated on December 15th. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, locals, legal observers who'd come to witness what the newspapers were calling the most significant wrongful conviction case in state history. Vera sat at the defendant's table with Tommy beside her, wearing clothes Lila had helped her pick out, looking like a respectable citizen instead of an ex-convict. Judge Harrison, a new judge, appointed specifically to handle the case because every local judge had been tainted by the corruption investigation, read the ruling in a solemn voice. Based on the overwhelming evidence of prosecutorial misconduct, witness tampering, and fraud upon the court, this court finds that Vera Mitchell was wrongfully convicted of embezzlement in 1994. Her conviction is hereby vacated, her record expunged, and all rights and privileges of citizenship restored. The courtroom erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. But Vera barely heard any of it. She was looking at the back of the room, where Vernon sat with tears streaming down his weathered face, where Lila clutched a handkerchief to her mouth, where Sarah Chen gave her a thumbs up from behind her professional archaeologist's composure. And in the corner, visible only to her, she saw her parents, her father in his work clothes, her mother in the blue dress she'd worn to church every Sunday. They were smiling, holding hands, watching their daughter finally receive the justice they'd waited 30 years to see. Then they faded, like morning mist in sunlight, and Vera knew they'd found their peace. The state offered her compensation for wrongful imprisonment, $3.2 million for 30 years of her life, about $100,000 per year, the lawyers calculated. As if time could be quantified so neatly, Vera took the money. Not because it made things right, nothing could make things right, but because she was practical, and she was 64 years old, and she had a lot of rebuilding to do. She didn't touch the gold. Tommy and Sarah both tried to convince her to file a mining claim to extract the wealth that had caused so much suffering. But Vera refused. "That gold is why my father died," she said. "It's why I went to prison. It's why the Dawsons became monsters. I won't let it poison anyone else. But it could be worth millions. I don't need millions. I need peace." She sealed the well properly this time, with concrete reinforced by steel, and planted a garden over the top of it. Vegetables and flowers, things that grew and bloomed and fed people, things that gave life instead of taking it. The crystal remained below, glowing softly in its chamber, connected to the phone that still hung on the wall of the store. Vera didn't know exactly what it was or how it worked. Some questions weren't meant to be answered, but she knew it was safe, and she knew it would stay safe as long as a Mitchell remained on this land. Spring came slowly to Millbrook, as it always did. Vera stood on the porch of the renovated store, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The building behind her was unrecognizable from the ruin she'd returned to 6 months earlier. Fresh paint, red, like her mother had always wanted, new windows that sparkled in the morning light, a sign her father would have been proud of, carved by Vernon's own hands, Mitchell's Country Store, Est 1952. She wasn't going to run a gas station. The old pumps were gone, hauled away as scrap, replaced by a small garden where customers could buy fresh vegetables in season. Instead, the store sold what it had always really sold: community, coffee and conversation, local honey and homemade preserves. The kind of small-town commerce that had nothing to do with profit margins and everything to do with neighbors taking care of neighbors. The bell above the door chimed, and Lila emerged with 2 steaming cups. "You're here early," Vera said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Couldn't sleep." Lila settled into the rocking chair beside her. A new edition, purchased with some of the settlement money. Kept thinking about how different everything is now. Different good or different bad? Just different. Lila sipped her coffee, looking out at the same view Vera was watching. 30 years, that family controlled this town. 30 years of everyone being too scared to speak up. And now they're gone. Martin Dawson had been convicted on 12 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. He was serving 15 years in the same state prison where Vera had spent 3 decades. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Dawson estate had been seized, the assets frozen, the empire dismantled piece by piece. Some of the money would go to Vera as additional restitution. Some would go to other victims the investigation had uncovered, people who'd lost businesses, homes, even family members to the Dawsons' greed. The rest would disappear into the bureaucratic machinery of the state, feeding whatever hungry budget needed feeding. Vera didn't care about any of it. She had what she needed. "Vernon's coming by later," Lila said. "Wants to help you plant those tomatoes you've been talking about. He doesn't need to do that." His knees. "Try telling him that." Lila smiled. "That man's been waiting 30 years to make things right. Let him plant some tomatoes." Vera nodded slowly. She was still learning how to accept help, how to let people in after so long alone. It didn't come naturally, but she was trying. "Sarah called yesterday," she said. "The university wants to do a study of the property, archaeological survey, historical documentation, that kind of thing." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd think about it." Vera set down her coffee cup. "The chamber. What's down there? It's not something I want turned into a research project. People poking and prodding, trying to explain something that doesn't want to be explained. Then don't let them. But the history matters. The indigenous people who were here first, what they knew about this place, that deserves to be remembered." "Maybe there's a middle ground," Lila suggested. "Let her document the paintings, the artifacts, keep the crystal out of it." Vera considered this. The paintings on the chamber walls told a story of people who'd understood that some places were sacred, some powers were meant to be protected rather than exploited. That story deserved to be told, even if the deepest secrets remained hidden. "Maybe," she said. "I'll talk to her about it." The phone rang that evening. Vera was alone in the store, finishing inventory after a quiet day of customers. The sound made her heart skip. It always did, but she'd grown accustomed to it now. The phone rang when it wanted to, connected to the crystal below, carrying voices from across the boundary between worlds. She picked up the receiver. "Hello?" Static, distance. And then, to her surprise, not a familiar voice, but an unfamiliar one. A woman, young, speaking in a language Vera didn't recognize. Then the voice shifted, became something she could understand, as if the crystal itself was translating. "You are the keeper now," the voice said, "the one who guards the gateway." "Who is this?" "One of many who came before. We have watched you, Vera Mitchell. We have seen your suffering, your strength, your choice to protect rather than exploit." Vera sank into the chair behind the counter. The receiver pressed to her ear. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing that you have not already given. You have sealed the well. You have kept the secret. You have honored the old ways without even knowing what they were. I just wanted to protect my family's land." "Yes, that is why you were chosen. Not for power or ambition, but for love, for loyalty, for the willingness to sacrifice everything for what matters." The static swelled, and for a moment Vera heard other voices, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, speaking in languages that spanned millennia. All the keepers who had come before, all the people who had protected this place across the centuries. "The gateway will sleep now," the voice continued. "It has done what it needed to do, connected you to your past, revealed the truth, brought justice to those who deserved it. Will I still be able to talk to?" Vera's voice caught. "To my parents?" A pause. When the voice spoke again, it was gentle. "The dead are never truly gone, Vera. They live in your memories, your choices, the person you've become because of their love. You don't need a crystal to carry them with you, but the phone will ring when it needs to, when someone on the other side has something important to say. But that will be rare now. The urgent work is done." Vera closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the receiver in her hand. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything. Thank yourself. You did the hard part. We just opened the door." The line went dead. Vera sat in the silence for a long time, holding the phone, letting the peace settle over her like a blanket. Summer brought customers. Word had spread about Mitchell's country store. Not the full story, of course, but enough. People came from neighboring towns, curious about the woman who'd been wrongfully imprisoned for 30 years and had returned to rebuild her family's legacy. They came for the fresh vegetables and the local honey, for the coffee and the conversation, for the chance to be part of something that felt like redemption. Vera learned their names, their stories, their troubles and their joys. She became what her mother had been, what her father had been, a fixed point in the community, a place where people knew they'd be welcomed. She hired a young woman named Maria to help with the busy days, a single mother who'd been struggling to find work, who reminded Vera of herself at that age. Maria had good hands and a quick mind, and she didn't ask questions about the phone on the wall that sometimes rang without anyone calling. Vernon came by most mornings, sitting on the porch with his coffee, watching the traffic go by. His health was failing. Everyone could see it, but he refused to slow down. "I'll rest when I'm dead," he'd say whenever anyone suggested he take it easy. "I've got too many years of doing nothing to make up for." Lila brought food, always bringing food, as if feeding Vera could somehow compensate for all the meals she'd missed, all the simple pleasures she'd been denied. Vera let her, understanding that the giving was as important to Lila as the receiving was to her. And Sarah came once a month, documenting the chamber paintings with careful photographs and detailed notes. She'd agreed to Vera's terms. The crystal stayed secret, the deeper mysteries remained unexplored, but the historical record was being preserved, the story of the indigenous people who'd first recognized this place as sacred. "You know," Sarah said one afternoon, packing up her equipment after a documentation session, "I've studied sacred sites all over the world, places that different cultures believed had special power. And this is the only one where I've actually felt something." Sarah shook her head, still wrestling with it. "I'm a scientist. I'm not supposed to believe in things I can't measure. But down there, in that chamber, some things are bigger than measurement," Vera said. Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what my grandmother used to say. She was from a village in China where they had a place like this, a cave that people said connected to the spirit world. Did it? I used to think no. Now," Sarah shrugged, "now I think maybe I just wasn't ready to understand." The first anniversary of Vera's return fell on an October day, so beautiful it felt like a gift. She woke early, as she always did, and walked out to the garden that covered the sealed well. The tomatoes were long finished, but the autumn squash was coming in nicely, and the chrysanthemums she'd planted around the edges blazed with color. She knelt in the dirt, pulling weeds, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingers. "1 year," she said softly. "1 year since I came back." She didn't expect an answer, and she didn't get one. The phone hadn't rung in months, and she'd made her peace with that. The urgent work was done, the voice had said. The living had to live. But as she knelt there, hands in the soil, she felt something that might have been a presence, a warmth at her back, like someone standing close, the faint scent of her mother's perfume, her father's pipe tobacco. "I'm okay," she said to the empty air. "I'm finally okay." The presence faded, if it had ever been there at all. Vera stood, brushing the dirt from her knees, and looked out at the land that had been in her family for 4 generations. The mountains rose in the distance, painted with autumn colors. The road wound past the store, carrying travelers to wherever they were going. The sun warmed her face, and somewhere in the trees, birds were singing. She thought about everything she'd lost. 30 years of her life, her parents, her youth, the future she'd imagined for herself, the children she'd never had, the ordinary joys that had been stolen from her. But she thought about what she'd gained, too. The truth, justice, a home that was truly hers. Friends who'd stood by her when standing cost them something. The knowledge that she'd been loved, was still loved, by people who'd passed beyond the veil but hadn't forgotten her. And she thought about what she'd chosen, to protect rather than exploit, to rebuild rather than revenge, to plant a garden over buried gold, because some treasures were worth more than money. She walked back to the store, where Maria was opening up for the day, where Vernon was settling into his rocking chair with his first cup of coffee, where the phone hung silently on the wall, waiting for whenever it was needed again. "Beautiful morning," Vernon said as she climbed the porch steps. "It is," Vera agreed. "You look happy." She considered the word, happy. It wasn't quite right. There was too much grief in her history for simple happiness. But there was something else, something deeper and more durable. "I look like myself," she said finally. For the first time in 30 years, I look like myself. Vernon nodded, as if this made perfect sense. That's better than being happy, he said. Happy comes and goes. Being yourself, that's what lasts. The bell above the door chimed as the first customer of the day walked in. Vera straightened her apron, put on her welcoming smile, and went to see what they needed. Outside, the sun continued to rise, painting the world in shades of gold.